Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to do what we always do. Take this batch of source material you've given us, articles, notes, transcripts, and we'll really dig in.
Exactly. And for this particular deep dive, we're focusing on some pretty significant recent legal and political events tied to Donald Trump. We're sorting through all these different accounts you sent, trying to pull out the key details.
Yeah, there's a lot in this stack. Some really intense legal stuff, some stark descriptions of the political dynamics.
Right, and these claims of corruption, financial dealings, some really startling things mentioned in the sources.
Plus, kind of surprisingly, a bit of bipartisan action tucked away in there, too.
It's definitely a mix, but that's why we do this. We'll walk you through it, point out the main things the sources highlight, and, try to add some context without getting totally bogged down.
Okay, let's unpack this then. So, diving right into the sources, the first thing that really jumps out is a couple of, well, pretty shocking legal situations.
Absolutely. The first one involves a man named Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The basic story, according to the material, is that he was deported by mistake.
By mistake, and this went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what did the sources say the court ordered?
Well, the Supreme Court ordered that his return to the U.S. needed to be facilitated. But what the sources really zero in on is the initial reaction from the Trump administration back then.
Oh, what was that?
Officials, including the Attorney General at the time, reportedly suggested they might not comply, might just defy the order, which, as the sources frame it, was seen by some as, testing the rule of law itself.
Wow. Suggesting they might just ignore a Supreme Court order. Okay. But the sources also cover what happened eventually, right? After a delay.
That's the crucial part, yeah. The material says after about 2 months or so, and facing significant backlash, other losses in court, public criticism, then the administration did formally comply.
Okay.
They facilitated his return, even, like you said, from a prison down in El Salvador. And the sources kind of frame that eventual compliance, even with the resistance and the delay, as a win for the rule of law. Like the court's word held up in the end.
Exactly. That's the perspective presented. Though there is a twist the sources mention later. Garcia is apparently now facing new federal criminal charges. A grand jury indicted him. They're claiming he played a, quote, significant role in an alien smuggling ring over the last 9 years, saying it was his full-time job.
Huh. Okay, so new charges now. But going back to the deportation issue, the sources seem to suggest public pressure was important. How did they say that factored in?
Yeah, the material touches on that. The idea that maybe all the public attention and criticism played a real role in making sure that ultimately the administration did follow the Supreme Court's order, that due process happened eventually.
Right, that public scrutiny mattered. Okay, so let's shift to the second legal situation covered in the sources. Donald Trump versus the Associated Press, the AP. What was the main issue there, according to the material?
So this one seems to center on a court ruling about Trump's ability to ban the AP from certain kinds of access, press briefings, things like that.
And how did Trump react to that ruling, based on what the sources say?
Well, the sources report he celebrated it, called it a big win, and then he made these claims that the AP refuses to state the facts or the truth, specifically about something he called the Gulf of America.
The Gulf of America. That definitely stands out. Did the sources explain where that came from?
They did, and it's quite something. The context provided in the material is that he reportedly renamed the Gulf of Mexico on his first day in office.
Renamed the Gulf of Mexico.
Apparently. And then, the sources claim, he banned the AP specifically because they refused to change their official style guides to use his new name for this, major international body of water.
Wow. Okay. And his press secretary, Carolyn Leit, she's quoted too. What did the sources say she added?
Yeah, she reportedly argued that the AP isn't guaranteed special access, to the Oval Office, Air Force One, sensitive spots. Right. She's quoted saying thousands of other journalists don't get that access, and that they plan to expand access to new media for, and this is her quote, the most transparent and American president in history.
Okay, so if we kind of pull back and look at the pattern here presented in the sources, it feels a bit like the Garcia case, maybe. What's the counterpoint the material offers on this AP situation?
It does have a similar feel, yeah. The sources are pretty clear with the counterpoint. The body of water is the Gulf of Mexico, and this legal fight with the AP is still going on.
Right.
And just like with Garcia, the sources seem to suggest this is another example highlighting the need for public voices to ensure, as one source put it, that Trump cannot continue to attack journalists.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly then. Because this focus on the dynamics around Trump's actions, it continues as the sources broaden out to the bigger political picture, including some really serious claims about corruption.
Yes, the material definitely paints a stark picture of the broader landscape. It talks about what's described as the Trump-Musk civil war, saying it has, quote, exploded.
Exploded. How do the sources describe that conflict? What's the nature of it?
Well, the perspective shared in one source is that it reflects a kind of gangster state, where it's every man for himself. They point to accusations flying back and forth, like Musk suggesting Trump should be impeached and Trump suggesting Musk's federal contract should be investigated.
And it's interesting, the sources note that the person being interviewed actually finds points of agreement in some of these accusations, even though they're coming from, opposing sides of this supposed civil war.
Right. And that leads into this major theme that emerges across the sources. Alleged corruption and financial self-dealing, described really vividly, like you said, as a gangster state and also as a bottom-up wealth transition.
The sources really dig into this, starting with claims about Trump's pardons. What's the argument they make about his first act in this area?
The argument laid out is that his very first act involved pardoning insurrectionists from January 6th, specifically those who injured police officers. And the sources really emphasize the financial side of this. They claim he allegedly relieved these January 6th defendants of something like $3 million they owed in restitution and fines, owed to police departments and victims.
$3 million wiped away.
That's the claim. And then there's this even more extraordinary claim mentioned, that he's actually trying to get money that has already been repaid, returned to those defendants.
Wait, trying to get money back from victims or police departments to give back to the defendants? That is extraordinary, like you said. And how do the sources contrast that with the Ashley Babbitt situation?
Well, the material claims that, in contrast, Trump has arranged for $5 million to be given to her family.
$5 million.
$5 million. And this is presented alongside the context that police investigations reportedly found the shooting was justified, and even Speaker McCarthy reportedly said the officer involved did his job.
Okay, so that's the claim about Babbitt's family. Meanwhile, what do the sources say about the police officers who were actually injured on January 6th, the ones mentioned earlier?
According to the sources, those officers, the ones who suffered really severe injuries, we're talking heart attacks, strokes, broken bones, lost fingers, some forced out of police work entirely, they've received, quote, nothing.
Nothing. And wasn't there something specific mentioned about a plaque that was supposed to honor them?
Yes, exactly. The material points out that a plaque was actually voted on, signed into law, specifically to honor those injured officers. But it reportedly hasn't been put up by Speaker Johnson.
Even though it was due over a year ago.
Right. And the sources interpret this, suggesting it shows they back the coup, not back the blue, at least when police interfere with what they call a Magi riot.
Wow. Okay, so here's where, as the source says, it gets really interesting. They pivot to focus on crypto and these alleged pay-to-play schemes. What's the sort of core mechanism they're alleging here?
Yeah, this part of the source material really lays out what it claims is a pay-to-play system. The basic idea presented is financial contributions seem to be directly linked to getting favorable actions. It's framed very bluntly in one source as, give him some money and you get what you want.
Give him money, get what you want.
Right.
Okay. And how does this crypto dinner they talk about fit into that alleged picture?
So the material details this Trump crypto dinner. Over 220 donors, apparently mostly anonymous. Tickets reportedly cost somewhere around $1.7 or $1.8 million.
Million per ticket.
That's the figure cited in the source. And it's framed as money going essentially directly into the president's pocket, completely outside the usual campaign finance limits, the normal $2,700 cap for a campaign donation.
Right, way outside the normal limits. Okay, and they provide a specific example, right? Justin's son. Who is he, and what do the sources claim about his involvement?
Yeah, the material identifies Justin's son as someone who'd previously faced SEC charges for crypto fraud. He attended this dinner, and then, reportedly, became a $75 million investor in what's called the Trump family's own crypto venture.
$75 million
Yeah.
After facing SEC charges. Okay. And what's the subsequent claim the sources make about the SEC itself?
It's pretty striking. The sources claim that Trump's SEC has reportedly, since then, dropped 13 different investigations and sets of charges against various crypto fraudsters.
13 cases dropped. So the direct claim, just to be clear, the source is alleging the Trump family is making literally billions of dollars by having these charges against fraudsters dropped.
That is the direct quote presented in the source material, yeah. It draws a very direct line between these alleged financial ties and the regulatory actions, or lack thereof.
Okay. And there was another specific pay-to-play example mentioned, something about a nursing home owner.
Yes. The material talks about a nursing home owner, Walczek. He apparently stole $4.4 million from his employees. He received a complete unconditional pardon. Just 2 weeks, the sources claim, after his mother reportedly went to a Trump fundraiser for $1 million. And crucially, the pardon reportedly absolved him of having to repay that $4.4 million in restitution he owed.
Wow. So the $4.4 million restitution just vanished with the pardon. And what's the sort of overall estimate the sources give for how much money is involved in this alleged pattern?
The overall figure presented in the sources is that Trump has reportedly saved people over $2 billion, billion with a B, in restitution payments and fines, specifically for those who, quote, invest on the Trump side.
$2 billion. The comparison the sources use is also pretty memorable, right? Comparing this crypto loophole to something else.
Yeah, they called the Trump hotel conflict of interest on steroids.
I like the steroids, okay.
Citing that old example of, like, the Chinese government supposedly buying up hotel rooms they never used just to, curry favor.
Right. And this all ties back in the source's interpretation to how power is allegedly being used.
It does. The material suggests it's a demonstration of that idea. Give him some money and you get what you want. And this alleged behavior is also connected, by the sources, to Trump's known belief in the unitary executive theory.
Right, that theory.
Yeah. The view, as mentioned in the sources, that the president has really broad control over the whole executive branch, even agencies like the SEC that are supposed to be independent.
Now, okay, it's not all intense legal fights and these really serious allegations in the source material we looked at. There was also that contrasting note, something more positive about bipartisan action.
That's right, yeah. Kind of tucked away in there. The material mentions something called the BRC Act, B-A-R-K.
The BR Act. Okay, sounds appropriate. What does this act do, according to the sources?
It's described as something really simple, actually, but something that goes a long way. It basically allows pet supply companies, stores, to donate their surplus products.
Like food?
Yeah, like kibble that might be just a few days past its sell-by date, but still perfectly good, allows them to donate it to animal shelters without having to worry about liability issues.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the sources mentioned the support for this.
Absolutely. And what's really highlighted is that the support was reportedly completely bipartisan. The sources specifically name people from both parties, Republican Rep. Young Kim, Republican Senator Tillis, and Democratic Senator Warnock, described as totally bipartisan.
That's good to hear. And the benefit seems obvious, stops wasting potentially millions of pounds of pet food and helps out animal shelters. Did the sources say anything about the shelters themselves?
Yeah, they add a bit of context there, noting that shelters right now are apparently overrun and very hard up these days, so it underscores how much even a simple thing like this can help practically.
Makes sense. And the sources even sort of expressed a hope, right, that maybe doing simple things like this could lead to more.
Exactly. The hope mentioned was that maybe finding common ground on something straightforward like the BEAR Act could, maybe pave the way for tackling bigger, tougher issues, like helping people who are facing cuts to Medicaid or SNAP pay benefits, which were also mentioned in the material.
So quite a journey through this batch of source material then. We've touched on these specific legal challenges and how they played out, the really intense political dynamics described, these very serious claims of financial corruption, the alleged pay-to-play schemes.
Right, billions of dollars mentioned in those claims.
Billions, yeah. And then contrasted with that surprising example of bipartisan cooperation on something, completely different.
Yeah, navigating information like this, especially on complex topics, it really means you have to look closely at all the different angles, the specific claims being made in the sources, understanding that whole landscape, even when the claims are conflicting or, frankly, pretty startling, it's just crucial.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Well, it suggests that taking the time to really examine the details provided in these sources, even when they describe difficult or contradictory situations, it can actually reveal some surprising links and maybe shed light on the underlying forces shaping our political and legal world.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with, based purely on what's presented in these sources. Given these detailed claims about huge sums of money, billions allegedly saved for individuals, millions allegedly flowing to specific ventures or families supposedly influencing official actions on things like pardons, regulations, access. How do we, as citizens processing this kind of information, ensure accountability, ensure transparency when you have such complex public allegations swirling around? What does the willingness, or maybe the unwillingness, within the system to even discuss these specifics openly? What does that signal about the rule of law based on the picture these sources paint? Something to think about.